Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
This is the Bloomberg Daybreak Europe podcast, available every morning on Apple, Spotify or wherever you listen. It's Monday, the 15th of July in London. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. Coming up today, former US President Donald Trump's defiant display after surviving an assassination attempt helps to supercharge his bid for re-election.
President Biden calls for cooler rhetoric as Trump says he's rewritten his Republican convention speech.
And it's still not coming home. Heartbreak for England as they lose the Euro finals 2-1 to Spain.
Let's start with a roundup of our top stories.
Donald Trump says he has rewritten his Republican National Convention speech to call for unity instead of focusing on President Biden after he survived an assassination attempt. In an exclusive interview with the conservative publication The Washington Examiner, Trump said, quote, "It is a chance to bring the country together. I was given that chance." The comments come as President Biden called for politicians to cool their rhetoric following Saturday's shooting. Speaking in a rare Oval Office address, Biden warned the nation was heading down a dangerous path in which violence subverts the will of Americans.
There's no place in America for this kind of violence, or for any violence ever. No exceptions. We can't allow this violence to be normalized. You know, the political record in this country has gotten very heated. It's time to cool it down.
Biden used the address to try to rise above the fray as he looked to move beyond calls for him to drop out of the race. The failed assassination attempt has shifted the dynamics of the presidential contest. It allows the Republican to focus on his own campaign around the idea of unity. Bloomberg understands that in the hours after the shooting, Trump personally contacted his primary opponent, Nikki Haley, to invite her to speak at the Republican convention.
Well, the attempted assassination has further solidified Donald Trump's control of his party as it prepares to nominate him at the convention beginning in Wisconsin today. Meanwhile, business leaders Elon Musk and Bill Ackman, who previously resisted endorsing the former president, came out with public statements backing Trump within minutes of his being struck. And Professor of Political Science at MIT, Charles Stewart, says that the shooting and Trump's iconic bloodied fist-pumping response will rally voters and donors behind the Republican candidate.
The specific reaction of Donald Trump to these events will solidify his support. And among that small group of people who are on the edge, maybe not willing to heretofore declare their support of Donald Trump, they're going to come on board because part of the Republican brand is being strong, being assertive, standing up to domestic enemies. And certainly Donald Trump is playing that role right now.
Charles Stewart says that the challenge for Biden now is how to push forwards without seeming insensitive. The president plans to reiterate his condemnation of violence in politics on Monday in a primetime interview with NBC News. Then, according to a campaign official, his political operation will pivot back to drawing contrasts between Biden's vision and Trump's.
The US Secret Service is facing harsh public scrutiny and investigations following the incident, which American law enforcement agencies have labelled as an assassination attempt. Since Saturday's shooting, Trump allies have blasted the agency over its protection of the former president. The FBI is leading a probe into the events, which Director Christopher Wray says will be thorough.
We have committed the full force of the FBI to this investigation. An attempt to assassinate a presidential candidate can only be described as absolutely despicable and will not be tolerated in this country.
FBI Director Christopher Wray speaking there. The Secret Service provides round-the-clock security to former presidents, but some critics have claimed the agency rejected requests from Trump's team for more protection, a charge it says is absolutely false. Secret Service agents will now turn their attention to the Republican convention in Milwaukee. The agency, in coordination with local, state and federal law enforcement, insists there are robust security plans in place ahead of the arrival of over 50,000 expected attendees.
As for traders, they are noticeably, if modestly, leaning into assets seen as benefiting in the event of Trump winning the November election. The Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index is up modestly, with the Mexican peso having led the slide. Futures point to a rise in Treasury yields when cash trading starts in Europe, and Bitcoin has risen above $62,600. The trades are based on anticipation that the Republicans' return to the White House would usher in tax cuts, looser regulations and higher tariffs, particularly against China. Although some see Trump trades gaining momentum, the emergence of political violence in the US may also simply add to market volatility.
In other news, China's economic growth has dropped the slowest pace in 5 quarters as the country reports a raft of economic data showing an uneven recovery. Bloomberg's Brian Curtis has more from Hong Kong.
This adds a whole lot of pressure on policymakers to lift confidence in the economy. The third plenum is underway today. GDP expanded 4.7% in the second quarter from a year ago. That missed the estimate of 5.1%. Meantime, in June, industrial production up 5.3% year on year versus a forecast of 5%. Retail sales rising 2%. That was much lower than the forecast. And fixed asset investment gaining 3.9% in the first 6 months. In line. On top of all that, China's new and existing home prices fell again in June. In Hong Kong, Brian Curtis, Bloomberg Radio.
And finally, England's 58 years of hurt will continue after losing 2-1 to Spain in the Euro 2024 final last night. Gareth Southgate's side were aiming to become the country's first men's team to win a major trophy since 1966. But the England manager says he can have no complaints about the result in Berlin.
They couldn't have given me any more. They couldn't have given the country any more. So ultimately, we lost to the better side, and we have to reflect on how that happened. But it's very clear in my mind, the game. For me, the key was possession of the ball tonight, and we didn't have enough control.
Gareth Southgate says that he needs time to discuss his future following England's defeat. Although the Football Association is believed to want him to keep his role, Southgate says that he's not yet made a decision. Now, it has been a seismic weekend in the United States. It's been a generation since US voters saw an episode of political violence like this one, when a gunman seriously injured President Ronald Reagan, of course, in Washington in 1981. And now, over the weekend, the shocking news that there was an attempt also against former President Donald Trump.
Yeah, I mean, I think the image of Donald Trump raising his fist after with blood streaming down the side of his face is a defining moment, perhaps the defining moment of this campaign. Our colleagues writing about it have described it as a flash of horror turned into pure Trumpian spectacle. And our colleagues Nancy Cook and Anna J. Kaiser have been writing about this and the image and what it means for the campaign. This is something that has changed the dynamics and how the politics is playing out in the United States as well. But it's also a shocking incident when you consider that, this is something that, as you say, hasn't been seen in a generation. No,
and I think that it also has and resonates around the world because of the more heated rhetoric, certainly across Europe, that we've seen. And in the UK, remember, 2 MPs in recent years have been killed themselves in the UK by attackers. So this resonates abroad, but I think the images are enormously influential in terms of the political campaign, wall-to-wall coverage after that incident. It's a long campaign, but this could certainly be a decisive moment. And heading into the Republican National Convention as well in Milwaukee, this is too a moment which Donald Trump can turn to his political advantage, and we're already seeing that in the reporting that we've seen in his interview with the Washington Examiner newspaper as well, that there is that he's planning to rewrite his speech to the convention as well. He's reached out to Nikki Haley to invite her there as well. This focus on unity, echoing really some of the messages that we also heard from Joe Biden in his address to the nation. Yeah, and this is very interesting. It was one of the criticisms, in fact, in his perhaps first term in office, that President Trump was not enough of a unifying force. So in some ways, it's also a political evolution of Donald Trump. Joe Biden, yes, you're right, said something very similar in the White House in the national address that he gave in terms of unity. But that also being converted by President Trump into, additional support, and particularly from donors, those donors coming out immediately afterwards in terms of sympathy and support and fundraising, I think is hugely important too.
Well, let's bring in our US government editor, John Harney in Washington, for more on this story. John, how much does this shooting now change the election campaign?
Well, that's a question on everybody's minds right now. I mean, of course, it gives Donald Trump a huge advantage, even though probably one he certainly didn't want, given the horrible event of Saturday when he was nearly killed. But he came out of it looking strong and looking like a leader, a hero, certainly to his followers and perhaps beyond that. He's in Milwaukee and he enters this convention for his third nomination as president as a hero to a lot of people.
He's given this interview to the Washington Examiner where he's talked about rewriting his speech to focus on unity. I mean, how significant is that going to be?
Well, I mean, President Biden gave a similar address from the Oval Office, as he put it, to lower the temperature. And that seems to be, at least for the moment, a intent on the part of both parties to ease on some of this very intense, angry rhetoric that has pervaded our political discourse for some time now and only seemed to escalate. Something like this perhaps focuses people on the great dangers involved. I mean, this was the first assassination attempt. This was a former president, of course, but of such a high-profile figure since the attempted assassination of Ronald Reagan in 1981, and that was traumatic. And I think there is a sense of pulling back, as I think Biden put it, and we'll see what Donald Trump says in his speech later this week.
Yeah, absolutely. And the convention surely will attract even more attention than ever. I mean, you've talked about former President Trump being a hero. He will surely get a hero's welcome. And the idea of him also inviting Nikki Haley, a former adversary, obviously another Republican, former South Carolina governor, to speak, that's also quite an interesting political move, isn't it?
It certainly is. I mean, they were, of course, former allies and then became pretty bitter adversaries during the primaries. And of course, she said, she didn't plan to go to the convention, and then he personally invited her. However, she did, I should say, before this, released her delegates to him, which was sort of a gesture of alliance, I would say. But it is important that she's there, and along with those who have been loyal to him all along.
John, what about Joe Biden and all of this as well? We heard from him and his speech to the nation, but what does this mean for his re-election campaign?
That's hard to say. Of course, the question is, will this movement to get him to step aside after his disastrous debate against Trump back on July 27th, which seems like a long time ago now, we'll have to see whether that aspiration, if you will, among some Democrats will abate or if it will intensify. At the same time, President Biden seems to be trying to be less of a candidate, perhaps, and more of as they put it, consoler in chief at a time of fear and trauma, as an episode like this certainly is. He's trying to, as he put it, unify the country, asking people to step back from some of this violent rhetoric that is obtained over this election, certainly, and over these last several years.
John, thank you so much for being with us to discuss. The US government editor John Harney there live for us from Washington. I think, using the word trauma for what happened over the weekend seems highly appropriate.
The US Secret Service facing public scrutiny now and investigations after the assassination attempt against Donald Trump thrust the agency into the centre of a political firestorm. Our reporter Tiwa Adebayo joins us now for more on this. Tiwa, just to bring us up to date on the investigation into the shooting, the incident itself and the man who carried it out.
Yeah, so the alleged shooter has been identified now by the FBI as 20-year-old Thomas Matthew Crooks. He was killed at the scene by law enforcement officials. Now, there is limited information on what we know about him further. The FBI says he wasn't known to them prior to this incident in a statement, and his motive remains unknown. He didn't have a criminal history. There is an ongoing investigation into this incident by the FBI about who this man is and why he may have committed this attack. So they have been searching the shooter's home and vehicle for further information. That search has found that suspicious devices were at both locations, so both at his home and in the vehicle. Although those devices have been now rendered safe by bomb technicians, they're still being evaluated at an FBI lab. Forces are still searching his phone as well. But over the weekend, there was some further information that did emerge about the shooter's background, including the fact that he was actually registered as a Republican voter according to voter registration records. But he did actually donate $15 to the Progressive Turnout Project, which is an organisation aimed at mobilising Democratic voters in January 2021. So there is a conflicting picture emerging about who this alleged shooter is, but there is still much to be gleaned from the ongoing FBI investigation.
What sort of criticism, though, is being levelled also at the US security services?
Well, Caroline, the Secret Service is a unit of the US Department of Homeland Security, and it is part of their role, amongst other things, to provide sort of round-the-clock security to all former presidents. But now some critics are saying that the agency had rejected requests from Trump's team for more protection. Trump is, of course, not just a candidate standing in this presidential election, but a former president. Now, the agency is saying that that's a claim that's absolutely false. But Trump's allies and others are saying that there is a number of unanswered questions about the incident, including queries about potential security lapses. We've heard actually from Mike Turner, who chairs the House Intelligence Committee. He said that certain eyewitness statements about the events are alarming. He specifically raised the example of a bystander who told the BBC that before the shooting, he and other individuals saw a man crawling up onto the roof with a rifle and tried to alert the law enforcement authorities. Now, Mike Turner is saying that specific account is cause for concern. So in response to this, the security service has said in a statement that the former President Trump as well as President Biden are subject to a number of threats which they take extremely seriously. And they added that they are constantly evaluating the dynamic threat environment and responding to it. So there's an emerging picture here. There will no doubt be further questions levelled at the agency as the investigation is ongoing and continues to yield further information about what exactly happened.
Focus switching now, though, Tiwa, to the Republican convention. And of course, even more security now expected there.
Yeah, so this has all happened the weekend before one of the biggest events on the Republican political calendar. That's the once every 4 years convention. This year it's in Milwaukee, and there's expected to be over 50,000 attendees. Obviously, the organisation of that now has been thrown into doubt in light of this event. We've heard over the weekend that the event is still going ahead, but of course there are now a number of other security concerns. The US Secret Service is making an attempt to sort of assure people that there are security plans in place in coordination with the local, state and federal law enforcement agencies as well. We have heard that there will now be stricter measures, including vehicle checkpoints, pedestrian restrictions, also limitations on public transport. And that's been created to sort of safeguard the 4-day event further. As for the actual participants, Donald Trump has said that he was initially after the assassination attempt, considering delaying his trip to the convention by 2 days. But he has since posted on Truth Social that he could not allow a shooter or a potential assassin to force a change to his scheduling or anything else. So we can see here that the security concerns did affect the plans of Donald Trump, but he is now making an effort to go ahead as planned. There are also reports that he's planning to use the speech as an opportunity to call for unity and perhaps soothe ongoing tensions. He's also reported, we've reported on Bloomberg, that he's asked his one-time rival Nikki Haley to attend the convention in what many are seeing as another attempt to project a sort of united image. So it seems that there are efforts on both the part of security forces and participants to ensure that this is a safe convention and goes ahead without any further incident.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe, your morning brief on the stories making news from London to Wall Street and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed every morning on Apple, Spotify and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
You can also listen live each morning on London DAB Radio, the Bloomberg Business app and Bloomberg.com.
Our flagship New York station is also available on your Amazon Alexa devices. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day, right here on Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.